May 27th, 1940, France. The German Wehrmacht was unstoppable. Their blitzkrieg tactics were rewriting the rules of war with tanks, Stuka dive bombers, and rapid-fire MG-34 machine guns. Captain Jack Churchill, 2nd Battalion, Manchester Regiment, watched a German patrol advancing. The Germans were armed with Mauser Kar 98K rifles. Effective range, 500 meters. Muzzle velocity, 760 meters per second. Noise level, 140 decibels. Jack Churchill was armed with a weapon from the year 1346, an English longbow. Draw weight, 70 pounds. Material, Spanish yew. Noise level, 0. To the modern mind, this was suicide. Bringing a piece of wood to a gunfight is tactical insanity. But Churchill understood something the Germans didn't. In the confusion of an ambush, silence is more terrifying than noise. He knocked a broadhead arrow. He wasn't playing a game. He was an expert archer who had represented Britain at the World Championships. He calculated the wind, the drop, and the lead time. The German Feldwebel, sergeant, signaled his men to advance. He was looking for muzzle flashes. He was listening for the crack of a Lee Enfield rifle. He never looked for an arrow. Churchill released the string. The physics of the longbow are brutal. The heavy arrow carries massive kinetic energy. It doesn't just puncture, it smashes. The arrow struck the German sergeant in the chest. It punched through his uniform and buried itself deep in his ribcage. He dropped instantly. No gunshot, no smoke, just a man falling dead for no apparent reason. The rest of the German patrol panicked. They started firing wildly into the bushes, unable to locate the source of the fire. Churchill then switched to his machine gun, but history had already been made. That arrow remains the only confirmed longbow kill in the entire Second World War. But for Jack Churchill, this was just the warm-up. Who was this man? Was he insane? Most officers carried pistols and binoculars. Jack Churchill carried a basket-hilted Scottish broadsword, or a claymore, a set of bagpipes, and his longbow. His philosophy was simple. Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. This wasn't arrogance, it was psychological warfare. Churchill knew that in close-quarters combat, tactics fail. Guns jam, ammunition runs out, but a sword never jams. And more importantly, a sword is primal. When a German soldier sees a man charging through the smoke with a meter of sharpened steel, it triggers a deep ancestral fear. It breaks their OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. While the German is thinking, "Is that a sword?" Churchill is already closing the distance. He wasn't fighting a modern war. He was bringing the brutality of the Highlands to the 20th century. December 27th, 1941. Operation Archery. The Commando raid on WWII, Norway. The landing craft hit the beach under heavy fire. German coastal batteries were pounding the surf. Standard procedure: keep your head down, run for cover. Churchill's procedure: stand at the very front of the boat and play the bagpipes. As the ramp dropped, the sound of the march of the Cameron men cut through the explosions. The Germans in the bunkers froze. What were they hearing? A funeral dirge? Churchill leaped from the boat, sword in hand, and charged. He threw a grenade with one hand and sprinted toward the enemy trenches. It worked. The sheer audacity of the attack overwhelmed the defenders. They were expecting soldiers. They got a berserker. Churchill led the charge across the island, his sword flashing in the Arctic light. He reported the victory simply: "The battery and the island are captured." September 1943. Salerno, Italy. The Allied invasion was stalling. Churchill led No. 2 Commando into the town of Pigoletti.
The objective? Capture an observation post controlling the mortar fire. It was night, pitch black. Standard infantry tactics call for probing fire and grenades. Churchill chose a different approach. He ordered his men to stay back. He took only one corporal with him. He left his rifle behind. He drew his claymore sword. Why? Because in the dark, a gunshot reveals your position. A muzzle flash is a beacon that says, "Shoot here." A sword has no muzzle flash. A sword makes no noise. Churchill became a shadow. He utilized the element of surprise to its sheer mathematical limit. 2 men were about to assault a garrison of 50. They found the first German sentry post. Churchill charged out of the darkness, sword raised, screaming a command in German. The sentry's brain froze. He was expecting a squad of Americans. Instead, he saw a demon with a medieval blade at his throat. He dropped his weapon. Churchill didn't kill him. He used him. He forced the terrified German to walk in front of him as a human shield. They moved to the next foxhole. The sentry shouted to his comrade, "Surrender!" It created a psychological domino effect. The Germans in the next hole saw their friends surrendering to a shadowy figure. They assumed they were surrounded by an overwhelming force. They dropped their guns. One by one, Churchill cleared the perimeter. He moved through the darkness like a phantom. By the time the sun rose, Jack Churchill, armed only with a sword, marched 42 German prisoners back to British lines. He had captured more men in one night than most battalions do in a month.
May 1944, Yugoslavia. Operation Flounced. Churchill was sent to help Tito's partisans attack a German strongpoint on the island of Brač. The attack went wrong. The partisans hesitated under heavy fire. Churchill and 6 commandos found themselves isolated on top of a hill, surrounded by German mortar teams. They ran out of ammunition. The commandos were killed or wounded one by one. Churchill was the last man standing. Any other soldier would have raised his hands. Churchill raised his bagpipes. As German grenades landed around him, he stood up and began to play "Will You No Come Back Again?" Imagine the scene from the German perspective. You are shelling a position, and amidst the smoke and blood, you hear music. It was an act of supreme defiance. A blast from a grenade finally knocked him unconscious. The Germans didn't shoot him. They were too confused to pull the trigger. Churchill woke up in captivity. The Germans discovered his name was Churchill. Berlin panicked. They thought they had captured Winston Churchill's son or relative. He was classified as a prominent prisoner, prominente. He was flown to Berlin for interrogation. But Jack Churchill wasn't a VIP diplomat. He was a dangerous animal in a cage. He was sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. For most men, Sachsenhausen was a death sentence. For Churchill, it was a puzzle to be solved. He analyzed the fence. He timed the searchlights. He calculated the guard rotations. He wasn't waiting for liberation. He was planning an extraction. September 1944. Churchill and an RAF officer crawled under the wire through an abandoned drain. They were free, but they were deep inside Nazi Germany, 150 miles from the Baltic Sea. They didn't hide in barns, they walked. They covered 120 miles on foot, navigating by the stars, eating stolen vegetables. They were eventually recaptured just miles from the coast. But you can't keep a man like this down. April 1945. As the SS guards prepared to execute prisoners before the Allies arrived, Churchill escaped again. He walked 93 miles across the Alps into Italy. He had no food. He had a sprained ankle. He met an American armored column in Verona. The Americans saw a ragged man in a British uniform. He walked up to them and simply said, "I am Jack Churchill, and I am looking for a war." May 1945. Europe was at peace, but Jack Churchill wasn't done. He requested an immediate transfer to the Pacific Theater. He wanted to fight the Japanese,
Why? Because he knew the Japanese culture respected the sword. He wanted to test his claymore against a katana. It was the ultimate duel he had been waiting for. He arrived in India, preparing for the invasion of Japan. But then, technology intervened again. The United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war ended instantly. While the rest of the world cheered, Jack Churchill was furious. He famously threw his equipment down and shouted, "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years." It sounds like a joke, but he meant it. For a warrior like Churchill, peace was a prison. 1948, Palestine. The region was exploding into violence. Churchill was sent to Jerusalem. On April 13th, a Jewish medical convoy was ambushed. 77 doctors and nurses were killed. Hundreds more were trapped at Hadassah Hospital, surrounded by snipers. Churchill didn't send tanks. He walked out into the open. He coordinated the evacuation of 700 people under fire. He walked calmly between the lines, smiling at the Arab shooters. He later explained the physics of his survival. People are less likely to shoot at a man who is smiling at them. It was a calculated psychological risk. He bet his life that human confusion would override the trigger finger. He won the bet. 700 lives were saved by one man's composure.
Peace finally caught up with him. But Jack didn't retire to a rocking chair. He applied his military precision to civilian life. He became the first man to surf the River Severn's tidal bore. He designed his own board. But his most famous act was his daily commute. Every day, riding the train home, Churchill would stand up, open the window, and throw his briefcase out into a random backyard. Passengers thought he had snapped. They were wrong. He wasn't crazy. He was efficient. He had calculated the train's speed, the trajectory, and the location of his own garden. He threw the briefcase so it would land exactly on his back porch. Why carry it from the station when ballistics can do the work for you? Jack Churchill died in 1996. His life sounds like a myth, a lie, a Hollywood script that got rejected for being too unrealistic. But he was real. He proved that in an age of drones, missiles, and atomic bombs, the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield is still the human spirit. He didn't use a bow because he had to. He used it because he wanted to prove a point. Technology makes war easier. Courage makes war winnable. He was the last of the Romantics, a medieval knight lost in the 20th century. Mad Churchill didn't just fight the Germans. He fought the idea that we are helpless without our machines. He looked at a panzer tank and said, "I have a stick and a string. Let's dance." If you believe that guts matter more than gear, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. We are digging up more stories of men who refuse to be ordinary. And tell us in the comments, would you take a rifle into battle, or would you take the sword? See you in the next one.